Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello, Rank Squad, and welcome to Ranks FC. It's your favourite transatlantic football podcast. And this week we are talking title races, looking at the big ones across Europe, giving them a ranking in terms of how exciting they are. There's lots to get stuck into. My name's Jack Collins, and I'll be your host today on this first Ranks FC of the week, but very much not the last. And I'm joined across the water in San Diego by Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm good, mate. Yeah, I mean, we've been very English heavy, I feel like, over the transfer window. So I want to balance it out a little bit. So today's very European focused, and we're going to definitely broaden our horizons on today's show. So anybody that's been missing their kick of Bundesliga or La Liga or Serie A, you will be covered today. And we're also going to do a little bit of Champions League because, Jack, I think it's worth talking about. We just had the Super Bowl at the weekend. It wasn't that dramatic, but it was because it turned out to be a pretty easy win in the end for Philadelphia Eagles. And it obviously was an unbelievable event, right? And people are still talking about the halftime show. They're talking about, what people wore, all these sorts of things. But it was an event. It's not just a sporting occasion. And really interestingly, today there has been some progress in terms of the prospect of a Champions League final making its way over to America to be played there at some point soon. Now, obviously, we've covered this before in detail on Ranks. I mean, what we're looking 3 years ago?
Might have been back in the BR football days. Is that long ago?
I think it was. I mean, I can't remember if we were in COVID era, maybe.
I think we were. I think it was COVID era. Charlie Stilitano came on the podcast and told us why he thought in his lifetime that there was going to be a Champions League final in the USA. And it's funny how things come full circle, because the day that this is released, Wednesday, I'm actually hosting a radio show for 3 hours with Charlie on Sirius XM FC today on the football show. So if you're up early in the States, I'm on the football show with Charlie. And I might ask him this again, considering the news.
Well, it will definitely come up, mate. You'll definitely be talking about this because UEFA have announced it. They are ready to engage in a new long contract from 2027 with Relevant Sports. Now, Relevant Sports have been involved in some of the ventures that we've already seen in America in terms of preseason tournaments and stuff like that have been held, and trying to bring the game to the masses and bring the big players to the massive, more importantly, and making sure that when teams do go there, they have some big names in tow. And Charlie, may well have been a big part of that, I think you'll find. But I just feel... What year are we in now? 2025. There's going to be a Champions League final in America within the next 10 years. I think that that's pretty likely at this point. I think we're getting to that.
I'd agree with that statement. And I think there was a reason we didn't necessarily call this Things We Love. And it's not to say that it's necessarily, a terrible thing or a bad thing. I think it's interesting seeing how the global game develops in that regard. And I think that you could make a fair and pretty legitimate argument that if you have a Europa League final between Arsenal and Chelsea that takes place in Baku, it'd probably be an easier for those fans to travel to, let's say, New York for that game, and probably less expensive, considering the fact that, that is a very difficult route to traverse, to go to Azerbaijan for that game. And there were limited number of fans who could make it for travel reasons, for cost reasons, for lots of reasons in that final. So I think that you could make an argument that if you're going to globalize it, and look, obviously the counter argument is Azerbaijan is within the bounds of UEFA. It is a European nation in terms of its footballing teams and what organizations and umbrellas they play under. That's the flip side of that argument. But if you're talking about ease of access, if you're talking about it not being comfortable, or it not being an easy thing for fans within a localized area of a club to travel to, then I think that argument might have gone under the bus when we started throwing to let's say, further flung places. And there's nothing wrong with this in itself, but in terms of the travel argument, in terms of the localization argument, none of that stands up if you're saying, well, you have to get 2 planes, a train and a bus to Baku, whereas from London, where Arsenal and Chelsea were from, obviously, that year, it would have been far easier to wander down to Heathrow Terminal 5 and jet off across the Atlantic to New York City. So I think it's interesting listening to these arguments and listening to the debate and how things work. I'd imagine that there is going to be trade-offs for these kind of things. I imagine that if there comes a point where a Champions League final goes to the US, let's say, in this conversation, at some point, Europe, and I know that sports obviously are not exactly the same everywhere, but Europe were like, well, if you're having that, then we'd like a Superbowl, please. And I wonder how that looks from a kind of cross-sport pollination perspective in terms of how relevant parties deal with that situation as it kind of develops, considering they don't all work within one global umbrella.
Yeah, it's a really hard one to get your head around because it's obviously not in Europe, so that is a massive problem that people will have, and I completely agree from that perspective. But say you were flying London to New York, say it was one of the London teams that made it. It's not a 7-hour flight, something like that. So it's further than most places you would travel in Europe, but perhaps not by that far for some of them. Cost has become perhaps more affordable. Obviously, the likelihood is that these prices would be raked upwards once it would be all announced. But like, you can fly to New York now for what, £300? Like, it's not like the
Lucy's going to New York tomorrow, and the cost of her flights were no more than it would take us to go to Greece, for example.
Which is crazy that we're getting to that anyway. But obviously, yeah, we've seen them already try to move La Liga games over there, right? Like, we were on the verge
Weirdly,
of that.
I have more of a problem with a La Liga game going
100%.
than I do with the Champions League final going.
I do too.
If the Champions League final is in X location, it kind of is set in stone, it's set in advance, all of those things, travel arrangements are made as you kind of go and as you progress through the competition. Whereas a league game, losing a league game at home, or, how that affects fan bases, etc. Look, it's back on the table as a potential thing, where we were talking earlier in the season about the fact that Barcelona might not be able to host El Clasico. Now, it seems like it's calmed down, considering, and it was all about to do with the Rolling Stones potentially playing at Montjuic and all of that. And it doesn't seem to have ended up being a problem. But one of the discussion points around that was, well, if we're going to have it in a neutral venue, why don't we bring a Clasico League game to Paris, to London, to New York, wherever that might be. But frustration of that is at some point it stops being a home game, right? And I think that when these games do matter in terms of promotion and relegation, when these games do matter in terms of winning championships, in terms of getting into Champions League places, etc., then suddenly losing that home advantage and losing your ability to be like, this is our pitch and we're playing on our pitch, matters somewhat. Whereas for a neutral final venue, I have almost less of a problem with it because it's at a neutral venue anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And look, there's always that prestige. If it was at the San Siro or the Camp Nou or the Bernabeu or something like that, Wembley, then I understand like the underpinned emotion of having a big game in those atmospheres. This year's final is in Munich. The following year's final is in Budapest. And I just don't think that fans are going to get to the point where they mind that much if it is in, say, New York. Now, obviously, the one thing they have to make sure on those occasions is that a large amount of tickets are still available to the fans that genuinely go to these games, and that they are at an affordable price. The Super Bowl at the weekend, I saw on the screen, it came up, average ticket price for the game was just under $6,000. Like, that is wild. That is not okay. And that is much more fitting with how US sports pricing goes. Like, obviously, I'm out here now and my mind is blown by how much it costs to go to sporting events, to be honest. Like, I find it really off-putting. Like, Dylan wants to go to watch the Lakers, for example, and like, even a rubbish seat is like hundreds of dollars for us to all go, right? And we could go to watch Premier League football for at least half the cost, I think, of what it would cost us to go to an NBA game, for example. But this is something that's going to have to be something we all get our heads around. It's going to be something that will raise its head time and time again. And I think it was fitting that we talk about it today because we did just have the Super Bowl and loads of people would have watched that and seen the events. I'm not saying that I want a halftime show in the Champions League final. I'm not saying that. But Americans are very good at hosting big events. And you can't
Excellent
really...
as spectacle is probably the phrase I would use.
And as a one-off, if they were like, this is just one time, we're hosting it here one time, and we will make sure it is absolutely magical, that the fans that would have had the chance to go and watch it, if it was within a European country, still have the chance to get these tickets at affordable prices in America. But we will make sure that this is magnificent. It could be actually pretty special. It actually could be something that gives us even more reason to be excited about it. Because the Champions League, they've already tried to glitz it up this year by changing the format of it. And this week, we're obviously all watching the playoffs. So they're trying to change things, and they're trying to progress, and they're trying to make it more relevant to people. And when you're talking about relevance in sport, then I'm afraid that American market is massive for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, look, the reason that we have such a large US listenership, etc., and why there is more of a US facing element to the football and global football market is because it's such a fast growing sport, right? In the way that soccer or football is growing within the States is a really huge element of what the global future, I think, of the game is going to be like. That doesn't mean that you have to abandon, all the traditions of the European game. And I love the MLS. And I think MLS is at its best when it kind of takes, some of those things, but also dials it into local tradition, into local culture. And it has its own kind of vibe and spark. And I think that's where MLS really hits that middle ground of being accessible and brilliant to fan bases with slightly different views on perhaps what the game and what the spectacle around the game should be. I think if you're hosting a Champions League final, and look, I said this on Monday's show when we were talking about various bits about the World Cup final, is that I want, when you're looking at something like a Super Bowl, I want the World Cup final, which is supposed to be infused with the flavors of the country it is hosted within. And I know it's hosted between Mexico and the US and Canada, but I want that to have that element of spectacle about it. I want that to be something that feels very special, but also quite unique in terms of what it's doing within the US. But I think if you then move the Champions League final from Europe to the USA, you would have to be very careful about how you pivoted in terms of what that was about. And we've talked before about the Super Bowl. We were talking about ticket prices, and I can't sit here in good faith and say I've been complaining about Fulham's ticket prices going up and then sit and be like, oh, I think it's absolutely fine for it to cost $6,000 to go to the Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. But I will say that when you buy a ticket for that, you are not just buying a ticket, you are preliminary buying a ticket for a sporting event. But also it's the entire show around it, right? It's that whole spectacle. And, ticket prices will be more expensive for that because it kind of revolves around lots of different things coming together around that game. And so that's a different thing. I don't think you could sell a Champions League final like that, especially to an audience, especially the local audience who might not want that even if they were willing to travel. So it's a really kind of thin line, but I think that there is scope to make this accessible. I think there is scope to make sure that this would be a success. You just need it to be handled by the relevant parties. And in all honesty, I don't know how much I trust the likes of FIFA and UEFA to be getting this right on a regular basis and keeping the best interests of fans at heart.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we've got the World Club Cup coming up this summer across America, and
new ticket price tiers release. They're not knocking them down; they're just making them different. I did see that and thought, looks like a PR spin to me.
Exactly. I mean, I'm not that excited about this tournament. There's a couple of games in LA that I kind of quite fancy, but we'll have to see how much they end up costing. So we'll see how that goes. Obviously, then 2026, you've got the World Cup, and US are obviously involved in that with Atlanta and Boston and Dallas and Houston, Kansas, LA, Miami, New York, Philadelphia, Seattle. Where else in America? San Francisco, among the cities that will be hosting games. So let's see how that goes too. This isn't something I'm to say that's going to be happening imminently because you've got Munich and then you've got Budapest. And then I'd imagine you still get a couple more years of Europe. But Yeah, within 10 years for sure, I think that we are going to get that game in America. Just talking of American soccer, Jack, my boys, San Diego FC, we had our first ever game at the weekend.
How was it?
It was at the Coachella Valley preseason tournament, which is utterly bizarre, by the way. It's because the teams are all playing in like kind of the same area, like when you have a school like tournament and like everyone's like just around the sides of the pitch waiting for their turn to have a game. It's like that.
That's amazing.
Paddy McNair was interviewed afterwards about it, who plays for San Diego FC, and they said, "Oh, what's been different?" He said, "Oh, I've never played in a game where you see the other teams just like walking around the pitch and like having a kick about on the pitch next to you while you're waiting for the game." It was like, it's actually quite cool, like chatting to some of the other players, like when you're not playing. But San Diego FC played against NYCFC and were beaten 3-1. But Paddy McNair did get the first ever goal for San Diego FC. A header.
I'm delighted for him.
Yeah, it was great. So obviously, like they've only known each other for 10 training sessions, so they weren't expected to like go and win the game really. But it's up and running, mate. And my season ticket has now been activated on the app. March the 1st, I'll be there. My first San Diego FC home game, so we'll be bringing all of that to you on Ranks. There's no doubt about that. Big MLS season, I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, it's a very exciting time, I think, in MLS as well. So there's lots to be excited about.
We've gone heavy there in the United States.
Look, I think it was a good place to start today, especially before we kind of start careering around Europe. But we are going to take this on to the main segment. We'll be back after the break.
Welcome back to Ranks FC. Today we've got a Jack Collins ranking. Yay, I can put my feet up. I will join in though a bit because I do know a fair amount about this. It's not like one of those where Jack talks about players that I've barely ever seen play football. So Jack, I am going to be able to weigh in on this one. But yeah, we were chatting obviously about what we would talk about this week. And it's a difficult one. The transfer window's just closed. We're kind of no man's land in terms of actual trophies being won. It's a Champions League week. It's a kind of strange time. But what we haven't really addressed recently is those big title races. And obviously over on the Patreon, we do try to dig into this. We have a few shows a week. So across those 3-4 shows, whatever we end up doing, we do dig into that, particularly you when you do your solo hits on the European teams. But I think it was important today that we address the big issues from across the entire continent. So it's your task, mate, to go through each of the big European leagues and rank them in terms of title races and like how exciting they are, what the probability is of a proper title race that goes down to the wire, and also just cover the bits and pieces that we know what's happening, but like how likely are they to get it over the line?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting, and there are obviously 7 major European leagues that I tend to pay the most attention to. So just kind of some vague guidelines at the start, though it is going to be a 7-1 ranking of those 7 leagues. Obviously, England, France, Spain, Italy, Germany, and then Portugal and the Netherlands as well. And I have discounted like second tiers. And I wanted to give some love to the second tiers because there's loads of exciting things going on, but they are going to end up as honourable mentions. So just as a start, the Zweite Bundesliga, which for ages was maybe the most exciting thing going on across the entirety of Europe. At one point, there was like 3 points separating first and ninth. It was absolutely chaos. It's always absolutely chaos in the Zweite, but it has kind of strung out a little bit. It's still very exciting, very fun. Cologne have risen to the top. Big win at the weekend over Schalke. It'd be great to see Cologne obviously back in the top flight, but currently Hamburg second. Now they've been in this position before and they've thrown it away, but it's starting to string out a little bit, and I am intrigued to see what happens towards the end of it. Also, the championship has been loads of fun. 2 automatic promotion places, and then obviously the playoffs. Leeds United currently top of the league after 31 games played with 66 points. Sheffield United 2 points behind them on 64. They were given a points deduction at the start of the year, so without that, they would be level on points with Leeds, Sheffield United, and then 3 points behind Sheffield United are Burnley, and 2 points behind them are Sunderland. So it isn't done, but Leeds starting to just about pull themselves, I think, towards the Premier League once again. It's going to be intriguing to see if Burnley and Sunderland can start to catch up with those two. It's been very much the big four kind of across the course of this season. Are Burnley and Sunderland going to fall away here? Are they going to end up in the playoffs? What does that look like? Because if you get a side that's been really good at the start and they drop off in terms of form, you see the sides kind of who pick up late wins and drive into the playoffs, often coming into them in the best form. So intriguing to see how that one shakes out. But I'm excited about the Championship. But the best of the second tiers, I think, is actually going on in Spain, because it is chaos in the Segunda, or La Liga 2, as it's known now. There are 7 teams within 5 points of top spot. It's really, really, really fun. So Racing Santander, top of the league on 48 points. Huesca in second on 46. Elche in third on 46. Mirandes fourth on 45. Real Oviedo on 44. And then Almeria on 44. And Levante on 43. So loads to look at with that, and loads to get stuck into. But the race for promotion from the Spanish second tier looks really exciting. Just outside of the big 7, a couple of honourable mentions. Romania, things are absolutely mad. There are 5 teams within 1 point of each other, but also after 26 games, they're all within 2 on the goal difference. They're all within 2 goals and 1 point of each other.
Sounds like
teams.
a 5-a-side tournament.
Honestly, 2 from Cluj, 2 from Bucharest, and aside from Crayova's University. Very exciting. Yeah. I mean, look, I couldn't tell you how these teams have played outside of
where do we watch this?
Seeing them in European competition, but it's very exciting nonetheless over in Romania. Switzerland, there's 3 teams at the top: Basel, Luzern, and Lugano, all within a point, although Basel's goal difference is ridiculously superior. Decent title race in the Austrian Bundesliga between Sturm Graz and Austria Vienna as well. 3 points between the two of them. So there's your honourable mentions out of the way. I thought I'd get the bit where you didn't have much to say done quickly, so I can throw things to you. And we're going to start at 7 now on the main ranking. And at 7 is where I've put Liga. Simply put, there is no title race in France. PSG are 10 points clear at the top of the table. They haven't lost a game yet, and their goal difference is plus 18 on second place Marseille. Wow. So it looks very much like PSG are going to be strolling to another title. And on top of that, sometimes you see these things and you think, is there any hope of a comeback? Considering the way that PSG have entered 2025, the pastings they have been giving out recently, the control they exude in games, there is no world for me where this comes crumbling down. And I think that it's pretty safe to say that the PSG have it done and dusted in France. There is some excitement around, I think, the top of the table in France, seeing how things shake out for that 3rd Champions League spot, which looks like it's going to hold for the time being. Monaco and Nice currently locked on 37 points and both giving very good accounts of themselves this season. Marseille 6 points clear of them at the moment, but yeah, we've seen Marseille fall from positions of grace before. But if we're just talking about title races, I felt like I should brush past France because PSG have it sewn up.
Well, yeah, they've had 0 losses so far in the league, and they've conceded 20 goals in 21 games. So they're conceding less than a goal a game. They haven't lost. The other team, the best record anyone else has got is 4 defeats. They're 10 points clear as we're recording this. They've also just gone 1-0 up actually in the Champions League playoff game against Brest as we're recording this. So
Brest haven't beat PSG in 20 meetings ever between the sides. It would be a great time for Brest to change that, but I just can't see it happening.
It was only a pen that's put them ahead, but yeah. It's just a non-event, isn't it? And we've talked before about PSG and this new version that we're getting, which is, for me, more likable, definitely more something that you can learn more from. I think when you've got all the superstars out there, obviously, it's a fun watch and it'll attract tourism and it'll attract shirt sales when you've got Mbappe, Messi, etc., etc. But these days, this team is being built very differently, and I don't hate them anymore. It comes down to that. I actually watch them with intrigue because I'm seeing players grow. Obviously, always talk about Vitinha and João Neves anyway, but Fabian Ruiz, Bradley Barcola, Ousmane Dembele, Desiree Doué, these players are all really exciting talents that we're going to hear so much about in the coming years.
Yeah, this PSG side are very likable, and I'm excited to see, not only what they lift in terms of domestic silverware, but how far they can actually go in Europe after what was obviously a poor start, but feels like they're just coming into their groove at the right time. I still kind of have them down as dark horses in the Champions
my mate
League.
Kim Pembe is still there, mate. He's still
exactly.
he's still knocking about.
Best player in the world, I think once he said. So we'll take it from there.
Best defender in the world,
Best defender in the world. Yeah, maybe not.
I wasn't that stupid. Come on.
No, okay, fair enough. Right, at 6, there was a bit of a toss-up here. I couldn't decide where I was going between Germany and England here, but I have put the Premier League in at 6 in terms of excitement in the title race. I think that Liverpool currently 6 points clear, but with a game in hand that they obviously play this week against Everton. Derby, form goes out the window, etc., etc. I get it all, but I just don't see Liverpool slipping from where they have been. Obviously, they lost at the weekend against Plymouth in the FA Cup. I think that might turn out to be something that they're not that bothered by if they go and win on Wednesday. I think they'll be like, cool, we rotated the side, we gave these players a rest, we won the league, we went 9 points clear, and everything was absolutely fine. Now, Everton will obviously have something to say about that, and their resurgence under David Moyes is nothing to be sniffed at. But I think that better teams than this Everton side have failed to stand up to Liverpool over the course of this season. It would take something quite remarkable. Weirder things have happened, but I think if that were to happen, this would take Liverpool 9 points clear. There's a lot of work for anyone to catch up. And I really do feel that whilst Arsenal have been pretty good in the league at the very least in 2025, they're not going to have the consistency. If they won every game from here on in, I still don't think Arsenal would win the league. And I don't think that they're going to win every game from here on in.
I think this is it. I mean, I'll double down on the fact that I'm not as hot on this Liverpool team as most people are. I'm not saying that I don't think they deserve to win the league, because I do. But I think we've definitely seen better versions of Liverpool than this one. But at the moment, like I keep saying, I'll hold my hands up, because nobody in the whole of Europe has shown any consistency that's close to what Liverpool have done. And there must be a reason for that. I think that there's fatigue setting in across all of the top clubs and the top players this season that is clear to see. And I don't think that's going to be helped at all by the fact that a lot of them are going to have to play across this summer as well. So I've got huge concerns about the levels that we're getting at the moment. But the biggest concern for me in terms of the Premier League title race is the competition. It's not there. Arsenal just haven't shown that they have the nous, resilience, mentality, firepower to go and take this title away from them. And it's not really going to have the opportunity handed to them to kind of force it either, because they don't play Liverpool until the third to last game of the season, by which point it's probably wrapped up. And that's the biggest problem here. Like, if that game was even 3 or 4 weeks earlier, then you'd think, okay, well, that is a game that like we could all really look forward to, and Arsenal can go and rattle Liverpool and then see how they react to it. But the fact we've got to wait until the 10th of May, as the fixtures are set out right now for Liverpool to play against Arsenal, just adds more doubt to me. I did wonder if Man City might bounce back in January and put together a run of results, but I think they're going to take a little while to kind of bed together. Obviously, Arsenal,
even if they did, they're 15 points. They're 15 points
exactly,
behind Liverpool without the game in hand.
But at least we know with Man City that they can go the entire season.
But if I don't think that Arsenal winning every game from here to the end of the season would be enough to dethrone Liverpool, then I'm going to suggest that Man City definitely can't do it. So it is that. Look, I actually have more faith in Arsenal perhaps than you do, in terms of I think they're a good side, and I think that ultimately what we've seen from them in 2025 has been much closer to the level required. I just think that they've left themselves too much of a gap. And that gap is going to be taken advantage of by Liverpool, who are going to be able to rotate in certain games, who have shown that they're not, I think Arne Slott's showing that he's not that fussed about going and trying to break records in terms of quadruples, etc. We saw the one in the Champions League where he rotated for the PSV game and they lost. Liverpool have lost 2 games all season where they haven't rotated really heavily. And that's okay. Like that's all right. It's a record that I don't think anyone's going to sniff at. It's been very, very impressive. So shouts out to this Liverpool side, but I think it makes the Premier League quite a dull title race at this point, unless something goes drastically wrong. So that's why just about I've put the Bundesliga in front of it. Now, Bayern are actually 8 points clear of Leverkusen, having played the same game. So they have actually got a bigger gap right now. But you're talking about the kind of moment where fixtures come in, and this fixture happens at the weekend. Bayern play Leverkusen at the weekend, and it is very much last chance saloon.
This is big, yeah. This is really good timing, yeah.
Side. It's a good timing to talk about it, but Leverkusen having dropped 4 points in their last 5 games, not ideal. 4 points in the last 3 games for what it's worth. And look, at the weekend, they weren't dreadful. They played really pretty well against Wolfsburg, but they were just outdone by a very, very hard working side. Now, they've only lost once in the league all season, right? So this is still a very good side. They've dropped more points from drawing positions or winning positions and drawing games than Bayern have. That's the difference between them. Bayern have drawn 3, lost 1. Leverkusen have drawn 7. Lost 1. That's where the differential in points comes. But I think that maybe where I'm getting here is that Leverkusen's record in this, I think it's a really kind of interesting point to get to, that Leverkusen have been so good kind of across the board that I trust them almost more to try and reel Bayern in if something were to go wrong. Now, I don't think that's going to happen. I think this is pretty much done and dusted. And I think that whilst I still have concerns about Bayern in terms of their ability to churn out results in European competition, when they're playing teams of a similar level, I think that they've fallen down a little bit this season. I don't think they're perfect, but the consistency that they have found in the Bundesliga has been enough to open up a gap that I think is probably going to be too much. Even a draw against Leverkusen at the weekend, and I think the title's done and dusted. And so that's why just about it's crept in here at 5 ahead of the Premier League, just because of the prominence of that fixture coming up.
Yeah, I mean, it's good, really good timing for Leverkusen to have the opportunity on the back of this discussion that we're having to go and close the gap and kind of make a statement. I mean, even Harry Kane surely can't throw away his chance to win some silverware. Kane's had a great season. In all competitions, he's got 28 goals from 28 games. But in the Bundesliga, he's got 21 goals in 19. Like, so reliable. I mean, obviously, recently there's been some talk about Harry Kane's clause and potentially even coming back to English football. He can't come back until he's got a title under his belt. Like, he has to at least come back with some silverware and say, look, that's why I went. I've finally got something to hang up at home, apart from like all the shirts that I've swapped with and my golden boots. But he's going to have that. He's on a very regular goal splash right now, and he's almost unstoppable, isn't he? But yeah, I can't see Bayern messing this up at all. But I'm glad that we have this fixture opportunity coming up at the weekend to kind of rattle that, because I would like to see them have to work for it. I would like to see Bayern really tested and have to.
Look, Leverkusen already dumped Bayern out of the cup this season, right? So it's not unheard of. Xabi Alonso's got an absolutely impeccable record against Bayern in the last couple of years. So I don't think it's beyond the pale that Leverkusen end up winning this game. And I think that would put the cat amongst the pigeons, even if it probably isn't going to be enough in the long haul. But the proximity of that game, the fact that Leverkusen have such a good record against Bayern, and the fact that they've already beaten them and knocked them out of a silverware opportunity this season, I think makes it very, very exciting.
The other thing with Bayern is that, say they did lose, their upcoming games, they got Frankfurt and they got Stuttgart coming up. Frankfurt are 3rd, Stuttgart are up there in 5th. There's other teams in there that, of course, want to upset Bayern Munich. People love upsetting Bayern Munich. So this is the testing phase for them. Like, they've got to come through the next month. Obviously, they're in the Champions League playoff as well at the moment with Celtic. But they've got to come through intact. And if they can come through this, then they'll come through it all.
Okay. All right. Shall we come to number 4? And this is the first one I feel a little bit bad about where I've put it. But I think it's a really, really interesting thing going on in the Netherlands. I've put the Eredivisie 4th. Not because I don't think it's necessarily one of the best title races, because there's only really 2 teams that are anywhere near it. But those two teams are going bolt for bolt. Now, if you'd asked me in November, I would have had to think about putting PSV in the bag. They looked that good under Peter Bosz. They were absolutely flying. In fact, we did an episode, didn't we, about the best teams in Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
Which I put PSV into that conversation. Now, I also put Sporting into that conversation before they lost Amorim. So some of those teams have fared better than others. PSV, though, have really fallen off. If I told you that a team that were very clear at the top of this division have won one of their last 5 games, drawing 3 and losing the other, and allowed Ajax 5 wins in a row to go top of the Eredivisie, I don't think anyone's been paying attention. But for the first time in over 800 days, Ajax went top of the league this weekend. They overtook PSV. It's on head-to-head because the points differential goes first, then head-to-head. They're both on 51 points. PSV actually have a far superior goal difference to Ajax. 45 plays 27. But because Ajax beat PSV all the way back at the end of 2024 and put themselves in that position, it basically precipitated this fall from grace from this PSV team. Now, there are other factors at play here, right? So Ajax have been slowly getting better under Farioli, and his introduction, his ability to sort out the defense. They've only conceded 18 goals across his entire season in 21 games. That was the thing that he was brought in on the back of, right? His time in France, what we saw him build was an ultrasound defense that they allowed, that allowed them to build onwards and kick onwards and provide a platform. Now we're seeing this at Ajax, and Ajax have finally felt this in the last couple of weeks, I would say, maybe the last 2 months, that they are finding the opportunities to actually build on that defense. Now, they lost Divine Wrench in the transfer window. He went to Roma. They haven't brought anyone, huge in to replace him. Farioli is building something very, very solid at the back with this Ajax team. And what it's allowed is someone like a Wout Weghorst to step up and really start to be an influential player. Ajax have the ability to mix it up. They have different ways of playing. They have different ways of attacking. They're quite happy to get the ball into the big man. They're quite happy to go short and try and play with a couple of very skillful midfielders, attackers in those areas, but they are not afraid to mix it up. And I think PSV have gone a little bit stale. There is key absences worth pointing out. Ricardo Pepi getting an injury that's ended his season means that they have no ability to rotate Luke de Jong, who is at this point the veteran old man of this side. We've seen Malik Tillman out for a couple of weeks as well, and he's a crucial part of this team as their number 10 and as a kind of creative influence within there. But it just feels like everything has gone a little bit off the rails for Peter Bosz. Now, it's not the first time we've seen this. It did this at Dortmund. But PSV looked so strong last year. They looked so strong coming into the front of this year. And now they are dropping points left, right, and centre. And Ajax are going, thank you very much. Yeah. Also worth pointing out, Ajax have a game in hand.
Yeah, they do. It's really interesting when you study Ajax's results as well. Like, it's always 2-0 or 2-1. Like, when they win, it's 2-0, 2-1, 2-0, 2-1. Always variations of that. They haven't actually scored, I think only once actually, since the beginning of November have they scored more than 2 goals. But they're just being consistent in terms of the way that they're getting the results. So they're not going out and smashing teams, but they're getting big enough leads that they can actually get things over the line. So, yeah, really interesting one there. Obviously, Eredivisie is a league that's more difficult to watch and keep an eye on. It's not as heavily broadcast across the world as some of the other leagues, but certainly one as we close in that we're all going to have more of an eye on. This definitely caught me out when I was going through it all last night. I didn't realise that we'd got to the stage where this was going to be perhaps quite as going to the wire as it seems it might do.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the other thing is that they have kind of minimized distraction. I think Ajax, now they were knocked out a couple of weeks ago in the KNV Beker, the Dutch Cup, by RZ, who are having a funny old season, RZ Alkmaar, because they're behind Utrecht in the league, which is not where they would have expected to be. But then Feyenoord, they're probably expecting to be 4th, but behind Feyenoord, who have completely lost the plot. They sacked Brian Prisker. They've been very poor, Feyenoord, for a couple of weeks, and that has happened just before their Champions League game. But this doesn't feel like a 3-way title tussle. They are well off the pace of the others. But RZ still kind of punching upwards on occasional moments, and that was a big win for them against Ajax in the Cup. But even in the Europa League, Ajax have felt a little bit off the boil. There were 3 weeks in a row where they lost to Real Sociedad, and then they lost to Lazio at home, and then they went to Riga and they lost to RFS in Latvia, which was a massive result for RFS, probably the biggest in their history, but one that really kind of condemned Ajax to having no hope of getting through and getting to the automatic round of 16 places. So it means they have this extra game now, which is going to be against Union Saint-Gilloise of Belgium, a nice little Benelux moment for those two leagues. But I think that Ajax will probably maybe not throw away the Europa League. That's not really what I mean here, but I wonder if we see a far more rotated Ajax side in the Europa League. And actually the idea of taking the league title back, now that it's back within the realms of possibility, might be the thing that just about takes priority in their season. Right. And how PSV deal with that whilst they are in this kind of wild period where they're in the Champions League knockouts, the playoffs, how that all comes together, especially with all the injuries, is going to be very, very interesting as well. And these two meet about 3 weeks before the end of the season, which could be very intriguing. Yeah. But more than that, PSV play Utrecht, who are third in the table, between their two legs against Juventus in the Champions League. That is a banana skin waiting to happen. And if they were to lose that and Ajax were to continue within the form they've been on, they could be 6 points clear in a couple of weeks.
Tasty. Very good stuff, mate.
Right, let's take a breather there. After we come back, we'll be running down the top three.
Welcome back to Ranks FC. The Jack Collins ranking is up and running, and now we are hitting the home straight. The 3-2-1 from Jack Collins on the leagues we cannot miss in these final months of the season. We've already covered France at 7, England at 6, Germany at 5, and Netherlands at 4. Where are we heading next, sir?
This one I'm going to go to Portugal. Now, some people might take some umbrage with me putting Portugal and the Primeira in third, because actually Sporting are 4 points clear of Benfica in second, who are 4 points clear of Porto and Braga, who are third and fourth, both on 43 points. But I think the reason I have this higher up than perhaps the Eredivisie, which feels like a tighter race between two sides, is because I don't trust any of the big three. And I think that there are going to be more twists and turns in this title race before we get to the end of it. Obviously, we've seen for the first time ever in history, Sporting, Benfica and Porto all changing managers within the same season. That has never, ever, ever happened before. Now, obviously, different reasons. Sporting lost their manager to Manchester United in Ruben Amorim. They've changed managers again since then. João Pereira replaced by Rui Borges. Benfica sacked Roger Schmidt earlier in the season and replaced him with Bruno Lage, who had a really good early impact on this team and really turned them around, but has seen a little bit of a drop-off in recent times. And then Porto sacked Vitor Bruno, who took over from Conceição, with André Villas-Boas being the president in the summer, becoming the president in the summer. They replaced him with Martin Anselmi, who they have brought in from South America, which is a wild move that we haven't seen anything of. He moved from Cruz Azul in Mexico, but he is an Argentine. So you look at what's going on there, and the truth is that none of these fan bases seem particularly happy. Now, I think if Sporting had won in the Clásico between them and Porto at the weekend, this would have probably dropped the place in my ranking. But if you have seen the highlights of that game, you will know that it was one of the wildest endings to any game ever. There were 2 red cards for Sporting for reasons that I still cannot fathom, and a 94th minute equaliser from Danny Lamasso Loda, who used to play for Reading. And you kind of look at it and think, one, we have experienced that stadium when there has been a late Porto equaliser against Sporting in the league and what the place felt like. And part of me was like, wow, it must have been absolutely unbelievable to have been in that building when the equaliser went in. 2, it probably just about keeps this title race alive because it meant that Sporting didn't pull that out to a 6-point lead, which might just about have got the job done. But I do kind of feel with the way that these 3 sides have played and the kind of streaks they've been on, Sporting have been better since Rui Borges took over from João Pereira, but they still haven't been all that convincing, I don't think, in terms of the way they've gone about things. Now, there's a lot of kind of extenuating circumstances to that. They have changed formations. They've gone to a 4 at the back. The Amorim 3 system is completely out the window. And we're seeing kind of new guard elements of this. They're playing with traditional fullbacks for the first time in 3 years. They are playing with a team that feels a little bit more strung out. Marcus Edwards was shipped off on loan to Burnley. Victor Gyökeres is in and out of this team at the moment, with Conrad Harder coming in and playing some interesting minutes. I wonder if that's with a view to the future and a view to the summer. Mm-hmm. But there is also that kind of question over the top of it, that if you're going to do this, are you going to have enough in the tank to actually go on and put the pedal to the floor here and actually go and win the title? And I think that it's going to be really, really interesting to see what happens from this point. Now, I probably should mention Braga, who are level on points with Porto. And if I'm keeping Porto in the conversation, which I'm not 100% sure I am, but if they're being discussed, then Braga should be discussed as well, who are on an absolutely storming run of form and have pulled themselves to within 8 points. Now, they feel weirdly maybe like the most consistent of the lot. And we're now in this phase where you're looking at them and thinking, well, if everyone else steps up, are you going to become, what would only be the sixth team ever to win the Portuguese top flight? There are only 2 sides outside of the big 3 who have ever won the league in Portugal. Mm-hmm. Braga will be looking at this and thinking there are errors to come from these lot, and, obviously big games to play against them in the mix as well. So I don't think it will happen, but I do think there's intrigue in the Portuguese title race because of the inefficiencies of the teams who are at the top of the table, because there is this outside probability or outside possibility of a winner coming in from absolutely nowhere to steal the title. But also I think that there is this kind of level of this, that there's so much chaos to be had and there are so many twists and turns to come, that even though there are bigger points gaps in this one, I feel like this could end up being the most entertaining of the lot.
Yeah, it's exciting. I mean, it always feels like the league that I need to have eyes on, because it's not just the entertainment factor, the excitement factor. It's the players that are making the moments, and they're going to be players that are scouted week in, week out. It's amazing when I speak to people every week about who I should be writing about, like what scouting's going on. The amount of people that say, oh, and this club were at the Sporting game, and this club were at Porto, or this club were at Benfica, every single week. Like, you could just do stories every week just writing about scouts heading to these games. So we should be watching them too, because like this is where gems are unearthed. But more than that, like exciting title races happen. And you've seen the storylines already at Sporting across this season. And for them to either win the league or not win the league is going to be a huge story. Like it's so fascinating what's going on there. So yeah, interesting to see whether they can get the job done. What's your hunch here, mate?
My hunch is that Sporting just about get it done, just because I don't really have that much faith in the others. But I would just point out that Benfica's last 2 games of the season are against Sporting and then against Braga. And Sporting's last 2 games are obviously against Benfica in the Lisbon derby. And then they play Vitória, who are currently 5th. Well, actually, they're currently 6th in the league. They're behind Santa Clara, but I think will probably finish 5th. So you're kind of looking at that and thinking, okay, well, if it's tight, when those games come up towards the end of it, could Porto be the one to take advantage? I don't know. But I think that there is excitement to be had towards the end of this campaign, and the way that the fixtures have fallen for Sporting and Benfica in particular, I think are wildly, wildly entertaining. So I'm going to be keeping a very close eye on the Primera, which takes us to number 2, which is where I've gone for Serie A.
Oh.
Now, Napoli currently top of the league on 55 points. Inter currently second on 54. And Atalanta currently third on 50. You know what? Atalanta have had a bit of a slide. And they're still only 5 points off this, with quite a long way to go. And I think I decided at the weekend that I wasn't going to write them off just yet. Now, it was really intriguing watching them absolutely hammer Hellas Verona. Now, Matteo Retegui scored 4. It was a masterclass in forward finishing. But more than that, I was just stunned by the fact that Atalanta, missing the likes of Ademola Lookman, with a couple of really key players out, were just able to put the hammer down. And if I tell you this has been coming, this has been coming. Like, it is one of those where you're like, someone is really, really going to have to hold it against Atalanta soon. And it turns out it was Hellas Verona, which is fine. But I think that the fact that Atalanta have the capacity to do this to teams means we shouldn't be counting them out of this title race just yet. And then there's the whole Napoli and Inter thing. And, look at the difference in terms of leading goal scorers. Look at Matteo Retegui, for example, as compared to Romelu Lukaku, who has 9 goals as Conte's senior striker. Now, there is a level of that where Conte has spoken out in defense of Lukaku. We saw David Neres go down injured today. He might have to switch to a 3-5-2 looking forward. But what we've seen, I think, from this side is that there are plenty of disparate parts. Losing Kvara in the January window and not replacing him is going to be very interesting to see how Conte responds if they don't win the title. They get that money through the door and they don't spend it on anyone. They don't go out and buy the players that Conte is asking them to look at. They decide that they're going to keep it and reinvest it in the summer, which might be the sensible move from a business perspective, just so we're clear. But if Conte now doesn't win the league, I think he's going to go absolutely off the deep end on this one. So you have this whole storyline, and Napoli looked a little bit blunt against Udinese at the weekend. They've drawn now their last 2. Inter were upset by Fiorentina on Thursday night and then beat them in a revenge game on Monday night. I don't think Inter are quite as perfect as they have been in some recent years, but I still think that they have the depth potentially to go all the way. And I think that Atalanta are still sneaking in there as one to watch. If they keep that foot to the pedal, there aren't many teams that can stand with them. Do they have the capacity to do that across all of the competitions? We shall see. Obviously, they're out of the Coppa Italia. They lost to Bologna, but across the rest and the Champions League, which I think they have a shot at going and winning. So I'm just intrigued by how this plays out. I'm intrigued by the dynamics of Conte's relationship with the Napoli top brass. I'm intrigued by the fact that he's now lost another winger in David Neres and he might have to switch the system up. I'm intrigued by the fact that Lautaro and Marcus Thuram have looked like they've had a really interesting relationship. Thuram goes off injured yesterday, and then suddenly Marco Arnautovic comes on and scores the winner against Fiorentina. I don't think anybody was expecting that. I think people were expecting more from Mehdi Taremi. We haven't really seen that. Zalewski's looked like a decent introduction for Inter for the last couple of weeks. And Atalanta have decided that they're so good from an attacking perspective that they can afford to send Nicolo Zaniolo to Fiorentina, who are 2 points or 2 places behind them in the table. So there's so much intrigue in Italy. But I think that when we're seeing this Napoli side, who've been pretty solid, finally have a little bit of a wobble, we're seeing this Inter side look not quite as invincible as they have done, although their goal difference is so far superior to Napoli's at this point. And then you have this Atalanta side who have the capacity and the potential to absolutely hammer teams. I think that this one could also go to the wire.
Yeah, I mean, I see it as Napoli v Inter for the title, but there's obviously that saying in Italian football particularly that it's defences that win you titles, right? And Napoli have only conceded 17 goals from 24 games. I mean, it obviously fits what we would kind of expect to see from the manager, but that's still remarkable, right?
Juventus have only conceded 21 and they're 5th.
Yeah, and I mean, this is the thing with Italy. It's like, that is kind of like, we'll set us all out like this, and then it's all about like the difference makers and how many narrow wins you can get, if you like, how many times you can manage to just like turn a game in your favour, and that's what it's ultimately going to come down to.
But that's the question though, because Inter and Atalanta, I would say, have more difference makers than Napoli do, especially now that Kvara has gone and that Osimhen is obviously still on loan in Turkey. I think it's intriguing to see how this one plays out, because if Napoli start not being able to kill off games, as they have done in the last 2 games that they've played, suddenly does that change in terms of the mentality, in terms of the mindset, in terms of what you're looking for when those people come out and they're like, wow, are we going for this, or are we trying to stop the other team scoring? How is this going to shake? The other thing with Serie A that I think maybe that kind of elevates it slightly more, maybe than any other league, bar the Premier League, is that the kind of teams around the top sides feel like they can cause more damage. Like Juve can hold you. We know this season. They've only lost 1 game. Fiorentina showed this by going out and beating Inter 3-0 at the Franchi. Like, we've seen sides who are in that mix. Lazio are in there as well, although I think they're too far off to challenge for the title. This Lazio side are very, very good. You know, they're probably favourites by the bookies to go and win the Europa League. This is a very decent Lazio side. Milan, we've seen upset Inter a couple of times already this season, obviously in cup competition, but in both derbies, they have pulled out results that will have upset Inter's apple cart. And I think that they can do that to other teams. And I think if all of those things are being put together, it means that this is now not just in terms of the three teams at the top who are the ones battling for the title, but also in terms of what games are you looking at that maybe there are potential step-ups in? And you're not just saying it's when they play each other. You're saying, okay, but what about when they play Lazio? Okay, what about when they play Juventus? Okay, what about when they play Milan? What are all those games going to do for these three teams, and how does it shake out from there? That's, I think, what makes this very, very intriguing.
Yeah, look, Napoli have got a fascinating few games coming up because they have got a tough one next. It's Lazio for Napoli, and they got to go to Lazio. So an away game there is really tricky. Then they got Como away, who are obviously everybody's new favourite second team. We're all watching them to see what they're capable of. And then they've got Inter Milan next after that. So Napoli are hitting a really crunch stage now in their scheduling. And equally, Inter Milan play against Juve this weekend as well. So this weekend in particular, we've got a couple of really big matchups coming. And it'll be really interesting to see how they can come through this spell. Personally, I trust Inter Milan more. I still think that Inter Milan are the team that win the Scudetto. That's where if I was to put money, I'd put it. But honestly, yeah, this is pretty wild that it's this close and this open at this stage. Obviously, like, anyone beyond third is going to be too far adrift to go and actually win the league. But like you say, all the way down to mid-table are all threats to you. Like, definitely in terms of actually beating you on their day. You've got Milan down in 7th. You've got Roma down in 9th. Like, this league table's crazy at the moment.
Yeah.
But yeah, Napoli 1, Inter 2, Atalanta 3, and all of them have reasons to believe that they can kind of just make that spurt that makes the difference.
Yeah, I think it's going to be intriguing. I've almost talked myself into putting it top there, but actually I am going to stick to my guns and stay with La Liga at the top of top of this ranking.
I think it's right.
I mean, nowhere else can we see this kind of bunching, right? Real Madrid top on 50 points, Atleti second with 49, Barcelona third with 48. Behind them, Athletic just 4 points behind Barcelona and 6 points off top are Real Madrid. 44 Athletic. I wouldn't completely and utterly say it's impossible. I think it's going to be very unlikely. But I wouldn't say, considering the way they've been playing and the way that they dispatched Girona at the weekend was a team who fancy themselves a lot right now. That was a performance that you go, wow, they're really feeling themselves. And to be honest, they've dropped 4 points in the last 5 games. If they hadn't, they would be right in this mix. And it'd be very, very interesting to see how that played out. But the three biggest guns in La Liga are 1, 2, and 3 in La Liga. They are separated by a total of 2 points. The goal differences between them, Barcelona streets out 10 ahead of Real Madrid, who are 6 ahead of Atleti. But this just looks like it's going to be one for the ages, I think, Dean. And obviously we saw the draw between Atleti and Real Madrid at the weekend. In some ways, I'm still wondering a little bit how Real Madrid didn't win the game that we saw in front of us. In other ways, I'm wondering why on earth Atleti was so defensively minded in a game that I thought was there for the taking. And thirdly, I'm still thinking about how good Barcelona were with 10 men when they played for 30 minutes against Sevilla down a man. So with all that kind of in mind, you know, we talked about the Madrid derby a lot on the podcast on Monday on the Patreon, but in terms of where these three sides are, I see flaws in all of them. And yet this potentially has, and that might be the reason that you look at it and think this is really exciting. Have Barcelona got the consistency with this amount of youth and the way that Hansi Flick wants to play? Are they going to burn out towards the end of the season again, like they did at the end of 2024, where they ran into a spell of form that really hurt their chances, considering they were so far clear at the start of the season? Are Real Madrid going to be able to hold out with this defensive line, with these injuries, with the fact that they didn't reinvest in January to bring in a centre-back and a right-back? And do Atleti fully believe, you know, after that performance at the weekend, that they can go and do this? Was that damage limitation in order to be like, we stay within it, we stay in striking distance, and we take our chances against teams who have been more of a problem to other sides than they have been for us? Do they trust in the fact that they probably have been the most consistent of the three in terms of performances over the course of the season? or will they look back at that game and think, wow, we really should have gone for it. That should have been the move.
Yeah, it's difficult to know. I mean, look, the thing that surprised me, I guess, the most about Atleti was they'd scored 11 goals in 3 games going into that Madrid derby. And in the first half, it looked like Real Madrid were there for the taking. We've talked again on Monday about
post penalty, definitely. Like the bit before the penalty was given. Also, for what it's worth, we spoke about this, but it probably shouldn't have been a penalty. And actually, by probably, I mean it definitely shouldn't have been a penalty. No. It kind of is what it is, right?
But in terms of what you're coming up against of Real Madrid, like the back line is obviously like not an elite line of defenders. Like it's not what you would normally expect to come up against Real Madrid. So you need to kind of make the most of that opportunity. And the fact that Atleti didn't do that just makes me wonder where they're at here, because, there's definitely a way of thinking that I've been seeing people tout. It's like, did they in the end, in the second half, just play for the draw? And in a way that's okay, because you just want to stay in the mix. But I kind of want to see them take a risk and go top, because this is the league that has the most capability to be topsy-turvy in terms of them rotating who's going top week by week by week, right? They've all played the same number of games, and there's only 2 points between all 3 of them. So there is definitely possibilities here where 1 week Atleti are top, the next minute Real are top, the next minute Barca are top. But it's the consistency of Barca which I trust the least, I think. I think that on their day, they're actually the best, but I'm not sure I can see them being clinical enough, often enough, to make that difference. If you were to obviously we've seen in the one-off games against Real Madrid, Barca can go and do it. It's not about that though. It's about the other days, the days when it's not all going for them. Can they dig deep and find the wins? And it's difficult to trust them on that front. They've found a little bit of form at the moment, and they haven't lost for a while now. So that's a real positive for them, because when you go back and to when they were beaten by Atletico Madrid, there was doubts about how they would come through that spell, but they've done really well to kind of compose themselves and make sure that they are in this conversation again. But they've had so many moments, go back to when they won that Clásico, and it was basically Barca are going to win the league. Real Madrid are not going to win the league. And then from that moment on, it all starts to turn back in the other direction. And now it's all evened out again, and nobody really knows where it's going. I just have more trust in Real Madrid. And I think that's kind of just a mentality thing, as I've spoken about a million times on this podcast. But I just hope that this does go all the way, and that we do get fixtures towards the end of the season that are really going to matter. I mean, you talked about Athletic Club. Athletic Club host Barcelona on the final day of the season.
Yeah, I did notice this, and it is intriguing. I mean, look, on paper, I know football isn't played on paper, and obviously this won't happen, but there is a chance that all 4 of these teams win their next 4 games, right? From where we are, you look at the next 4 and you say Real Madrid have Osasuna away. Not an easy place to go, but equally, you'd imagine that Real Madrid in this mood would win that game. We talk about the fact that Barcelona host Rayo, that should be fine, and Atletico host Celta Vigo. So that's one match day. The week after that, Barcelona away at Las Palmas. Obviously, Las Palmas have caused various teams problems this season, but you would expect them to win that game. Real Madrid, Girona, Atletico away at Valencia, who are improved, but still down towards the bottom of the table. The next week after that, Madrid are away at Betis, which has been traditionally a really difficult game for them, but Betis are way too all over the place this season. And then in that week, Barcelona play Real Sociedad and Atleti play Athletic. So that week, the weekend of the 2nd of March, but we could be in this exact position on, in the 1st of March, let's say, on that Friday before that weekend, the league could be exactly as it is now. And then it becomes very, very interesting because, 2 weeks after that, there's a really big match day where Atleti play Barcelona, and Real Madrid that weekend are away at Villarreal, who are currently 5th, and then also having a very, very good season under Marcelino. So those kind of weekends, it feels like a little bit that all the big gun weekends happen at the same time in terms of, tricky game for Atleti playing Barcelona. also Real Madrid have a difficult fixture, away at El Madrigal that week against Villarreal. The weekends where Atleti play Athletic, Real Madrid have a traditionally difficult fixture for them against Betis, and Barcelona at home against Real Sociedad. Okay, having a worse season than many expected, but not going to be a pushover in that game either. So I think what's really intriguing about this title race is that the weekends which look on paper the most difficult for the three teams at the top of the table, they kind of all have difficult weekends at the same time. And that might make things very, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I think when I look at the home straights that they've all got to face, I think Atleti will be in a wonderful position if they can just stay within this 2 points from the top. Then I think that they all set themselves up really nicely to have a strong push for it. And I think that that's when the Diego Simeone mentality of like, okay, we don't pick in your moments to manage games. That's when that really becomes key, because obviously the other two teams are under much more pressure to actually win their matches. Like they're within the stadium, within the globally, all the fans that are expecting on them. Atleti don't have that. They've just got to manage in-house what they're doing week by week. And I do look at it and think, yeah, as we get to that home straight, if they're right up there still, then maybe they're feeling less pressure to do so. Obviously, they'll be feeling it within themselves because they're like, we could actually do this, but I feel like they can handle it. So, yeah, I've got no idea. As I say, my hunch will be that Real Madrid do get the job done, but that's nothing more than a hunch at this stage.
My hunch is that Atleti see this out, but that basically comes from the idea that I think Barcelona are slightly too inconsistent, may well flame out a little bit, just in terms of the amount of games they have to play. And that Real Madrid, if they get to the semi-finals of the Champions League, obviously we're recording this, before they play against Manchester City, and there's a lot of football to be played. But if they do get towards those latter stages, at what point do Real Madrid turn their eyes to the Champions League and say number one priority is the tournament which we dominate and which, our lifeblood is based on? Because I think that happens, right? With Real Madrid, every time you get to that point where they go, the Champions League is king at the Bernabeu. And if they have the opportunity to win that, is it worth giving up a league title for? I don't know. I don't know how, the priorities exist within the fan base, but I would imagine that the Champions League remains king for a lot of people at the Bernabeu. And maybe that is a thing that makes the difference towards the end of this, but we shall see. And with that, we've come to the end of our little ranking.
That was fun.
That was fun.
I learned a lot.
I enjoyed that.
I learned a lot.
Thanks, you. Man. I'm glad you've learned a lot. I hope that everyone listening has enjoyed this episode and that little run through the best title races in the biggest leagues in Europe. That's all from us. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. Thank you so much, all of you, for listening to this episode of Ranks FC. We will be back after Wednesday's Champions League games with a Champions League takeaway for the first time ever, discussing a playoff round in the Champions League, which is very exciting. And then Dougie and Sam will be making a return on Friday with the truth as well. So lots to look forward to here on the Ranks FC channel. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you all very shortly. Take it easy, gang. Peace.